Alright, while we wait for our valiant assistant to return. So this is the print that I've got in the resin printer, since we're discussing all things, whatever. So we can select it, we can spin it. This Chitabox, this is the factory for the Elegoo Mars, which is the resin 3D printer I have. Cannot recommend highly enough. Right, so we can click out of that. We can delete this. I've sized this for a specific reason. I have one that's in the printer when my stalwart assistant returns. We'll see if it's right, because I need a two-parter. So I've got this little fella. He was the first print that I put together. Sized way too small for what I need. I'll show you one of these days how to fill these holes in with your photo resin. And then we got, I increased my sizes to get my Plague Doctor mask. Again, with resin it's hard to say. You get weird results sometimes. It'll hollow out and make a hole. See, same print, just a little hole on his nose, a little hole there. Still too small for what we're trying to do. So our aunt does dolls, which again, like I said, will be uploaded when I find out what her Etsy site is. So she does these really cool, amazing dolls. So here's a face that she's made. And so what we're trying to do is make a Plague Doctor mask for her to make a doll out of. So she's given me this head for size purposes, and then she needs some boots printed to go with her dolls. She can't buy them herself because they're kind of custom made. My noisy assistant is back. So we're gonna make boots, which you'll see at some point for that later. So anyway, so we're gonna take a print off the printer.
Now the amateur assistant shows up.
Which, as we've discussed before, is a little problematic to do. Me holding the camera and trying not to get this. Where I could use gloves for that resin that we did in the other video. I definitely do it for this because we're gonna need another one of these alcohol wipes. It's handy dandies, increased percentages. And as I've shown in the other video, I've got my 3 tanks for rinsing. Right, so you take your little plastic spatula. It's important here, so we go to our first tank, which is the initial rinse, right? And I just talked about that. And you always use your plastic scraper because you don't want to scratch the surface of your print platform. So we take it off. I personally have added a handle to my lid because there's a computer screen and I don't want my fingers all gross if I was to touch it. Elegoo Mars lid does not come with a handle. I've drilled some holes and put it in there. Add credit to someone else I've seen. Here's a Keith hair that would be getting in there. Super critical for that. So we dropped our print into the wash to take all the big resin off of it. Right? Like we discussed. There's some holes in them, but for this particular individual that we're printing a mask for, that's not uncommon. It will actually probably be a pretty cool effect. So you've got your support structure, right? And that peels off pretty easily, right? And then that's going to leave us our finished model underneath. And since this individual is a Plague Doctor, his mask being cracked and kind of broken will actually probably be a really cool effect, especially when it's painted right, because these guys are a little bit weird. Plague Doctors around the 1800s, around the first pandemic, which is oddly suiting considering the last couple years we've had. And they wore masks like this, A, because they thought it kind of protected them from the fumes, but they would stuff rose petals and other things in the front of the mask to cut the smell of the dead that they were dealing with. But it gave them a very distinct and a very creepy look.
Was it effective?
It was effective enough that they wore these masks and they wore the goggles in some semblance of protecting them from this, but it gave them a bad reputation because they weren't really medical physicians, you know, because you go back to Frankenstein times and stuff, and there wasn't really a medical whatever. So we peeled off the support structure, we give it a second wash. Like I've said, they're prone to get a really white residue that comes from the resin if you don't give them several washes. I have an electric toothbrush for fine detail on smaller like D&D figures or something like that. For big guys like this, you can just give them a bit of a rinse and they'll be okay. A 3-part rinse is what I usually do, and graduated levels of cleanliness. So when I get to this, I'm not going to contaminate this alcohol because, again, I'm Scottish and I'm cheap. This is super clean alcohol, but as this one finally gets, the first one finally gets to the point it's unusable, I will shift everything down, clean that last one out, and then refill it, and that will then become my final wash tank. So there's our finished washed guy. Right, the 3D printer prints holes in it so that it drains. Right, it does that deliberately. This is an imperfect, it's a flaw in the mechanism, I think, because they're not consistent with where they print holes. I'm going to print another one if this is the right size, and it won't have all these holes, or it'll have completely different holes. So like I was showing in the beginning of the video with the head, now we're going to see if this is the right size mask, which for her doll, that will probably make a really cool effect. Once painted and cured, that will be about the right size mask. You know, she can change her head a little bit when she does the doll, and once this is cured, it's not going to be nearly as fragile. So since I'm pretty happy with the size, what I can do, because we're dealing with photo resin, is you can take a little dropper like this, give your resin, this is just your standard, like we talked about, your poly resin, get it off Amazon or wherever. What doesn't come from just Bezos these days. Alright, so you put it in this dropper. Right? Okay. And we'll close our resin tank up because I'm clumsy. And then I've got a resin flashlight. Right, this is a UV flashlight.
Black light?
Well, it's UV, so it's a little bit different. Similar to black light. So then we got our hole here in the nose. So you want to be careful plugging up. If you printed something that was solid and it's got holes in it, you don't want to UV cure it until such times as you've let it dry out thoroughly. Otherwise it'll explode because it builds up pressure. So you just take this little resin dripper there and you put a drop of your UV resin in there to fill the hole, and you hit it with a UV.
Kind of like
that is instantly cured.
Kind of like a filling.
Exactly. You just fill the holes in. The second that light hits it, the sunlight, anything that's UV, it's instantly cured. Right. So we're just going to fill in this hole, and then we can sand it after it's cured fully. Now, if I hit the dropper with this, it would cure in the dropper, and that would be the end of that. And I know this from a fact because I've done it. So there we go. So we filled in this hole in his beak. Right, so it didn't get to this side. See how it's still fluid?
Right.
Right, so if we're not happy with how we got a blister there or whatever, we can wipe that away because it's only cured one side of the print for that UV. And then we pop it again for just a split second. That's harder than woodpecker lips, and then going nowhere. So I can fill in the rest of the print. Like if I don't like this hole here,
right,
I can do the exact same thing. Right, so, but we're leaving air holes for it to drain from and harden, so we can just sit here and then after the fact I can sand it down to make it match the rest of it, because we're filling in a hole, so that's kind of tricky in itself with the liquid. But it cures this fast. This is the kind of stuff that dentists use to put fillings in their teeth. That's why they shine that flashlight in there. You just slowly build out. And you can do this after the fact, once it's cured in the curing tank. See, we've got draining coming out of the nose here. This nose hole is where we dipped him in the alcohol. He filled up this cavity, but that's what lets it burp. So anyway, So for the stamp from this point, I can fill all this in later after it cures. If this is the size we wanted, otherwise we can increase the size of the printer. So it goes in the UV tank, and it sits here on our little rotating basis.
Stand by.
He'll hang out there until tomorrow sometime. You know, getting plenty of UV. It's all this. This is the tape you use for air conditioners. That foil shiny tape. So we get mass reflection inside this. Not very expensive. You can buy one of those custom tanks from, you know, wherever, but this is the cheapest and, in my opinion, the best way to do it. So then we're going to come down here. Now that we're happy with the size of that print, we're going to just hit confirm, and we're going to tell it to do it again. Right, so this is what we printed last, was the Plague Doctor mask, which if you guys have questions or want to see how to do the program, we can do another video for that. Just leave it in the comments below. We hit print, and it's going to run program. He's going to come down and dip himself in the UV tank. Because there's no sunlight in here, you can see what it does. I recommend greasing the screw on your printer because it will bind. Right, so it's going to come down here and it's going to dip twice to self-level itself. Right, and as long as you got enough fluid in there to go over the top of that base plate. And now you can see it here exposing that base plate to the UV that's coming up from the bottom. So when you do resin printing, they print upside down. There's the PLA printer prints from the bottom up, which you can see it doing right there.
What do you got going on over here?
That is a Nintendo Switch holder.
Oh.
Which I showed you guys the other day. So
this is the finished product?
Yeah, that is currently printing the Mario tube and the lettering for the Switch. The bases, I've printed a couple of already. So just getting different colors for them, and it holds the Switch games. For the kids, you know, I haven't seen one on Amazon or anywhere else. Probably get sued by Nintendo for trademark infringement, whatever.
Probably.
But, so there you go. That's it.
All right.
All right.
Awesome.